I want you to picture the exact moment your bank account hits zero, not low, not tight until payday, zero, and then picture the phone ringing 5 minutes later, and it's the hospital. That happened to me on a Tuesday afternoon in autumn, and for about 18 months after that, I genuinely believed my life was over. Not in a dramatic, throw myself off a bridge kind of way. I want to be careful how I say that, but in the quieter, more corrosive way. The way where you stop believing things are ever going to be okay again, and you start making decisions from that belief. If you're watching this because you're in the middle of your own version of that Tuesday, because the numbers don't add up, because someone you love is sick, because you did everything right, and it still fell apart, then stay with me for a bit. I'm not going to tell you I've got some clever trick that fixes it. I'm going to tell you what actually happened to me, warts and all, and where I ended up. Because I did end up somewhere solid. And if a bloke like me could find his way back, there's a fair chance you can too. My name's Paul. This is the year the floor gave way underneath me, and what I built on top of the wreckage. I grew up in a little timber town called Wattlebrook, a few hours inland, the kind of place where everyone knew whose ute belonged to whom, and the pub did a Thursday Palmer night that half the district turned up for. My old man was a carpenter, and his old man before him laid bricks, so I suppose you could say the trade was in the blood. By the time I was 26, I'd done my apprenticeship, picked up my ticket, and started running building jobs on the edge of town with a bloke named Reg, who taught me half of what I knew and trusted me with the rest. We called it Bracken and Coombs Building. My surname's Bracken, his was Coombs, and for a good stretch of years, it did all right. Nothing flashy. We supervised renovations, the odd extension, custom builds for people doing up old Queenslanders and weatherboard cottages. I married a woman named Ellie who taught piano out of the front room of her parents' place, and within a few years, we had 2 kids, a daughter, Maisie, and a son a couple of years behind her, Curtis. I say all this not because it matters in the details, but because I want you to understand what normal looked like for us, so you understand what got taken away. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling either. We had a modest brick house with a Hills hoist out back, and a mortgage we could see the end of, eventually, if we kept our heads down. We had about 4 years' worth of savings tucked into a term deposit that Ellie's dad had talked us into. Never touch it, he used to say, tapping the side of his nose like it was some great secret. That's your safety net. That. We had a caravan we towed up the coast every January. We had, in other words, exactly the kind of quiet, unremarkable stability that you don't appreciate until it's gone. I used to lie awake sometimes, not with worrying, but with a kind of smug contentment running through the mats in my head. The jobs were ticking along. The mortgage had 11 years left on it. Maisie was going all right at school. Curtis was obsessed with cricket and mud. And Ellie's piano students kept multiplying, because word travels fast in a small town when someone's good at what they do. I thought, and I remember thinking this almost word for word, we've done it. We've built something that can weather a bit of bad luck. I was about to find out exactly how much bad luck it takes. It started small, the way these things usually do. Maisie was 11. She'd been getting these headaches for a few weeks that we put down to the change of season. Maybe her eyes needing testing. Maybe too much time on a screen. The usual parental guesswork. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Ellie rang me on site, and her voice had a pitch to it I'd never heard before. Maisie had collapsed at school. An ambulance was involved. I remember putting down my tools and just walking off the job, leaving the crew standing there, leaving Reg with a question half out of his mouth. I'm not going to walk you through the medical details, partly because it's not really my place to, and partly because, honestly, a lot of that week is a blur to me even now. One of those stretches of time your brain protects you from remembering too clearly. What I can tell you is that it turned into a long stay in a hospital 3 hours from home, then a longer stay in a different one that specialized in the sort of thing he had going on. Then months of appointments, specialists, travel, accommodation near the hospital, because driving 6 hours a day wasn't sustainable. Time off work, that then became time off work indefinitely. Because how do you supervise a building crew when your daughter is fighting for her life to states away? Here's the thing nobody tells you about a crisis like that. It's not one bill. It's not one gap in the finances that you patch and move on from. It's 100 small leaks all opening at once. It's fuel for the drive, and parking at the hospital, and a motel because the ward doesn't have a bed for parents, and meals you're too exhausted to cook, so you buy takeaway, and the mortgage back home that doesn't care that your daughter is sick, and the building sites that go quiet because Reg can't run the crew alone forever, and then eventually don't run at all. And every single one of those leaks is small enough that you tell yourself we'll manage, right up until the day you look at the term deposit, Ellie's dad's precious safety net, and it's gone, all of it. Every last dollar we'd put away over 9 years, gone in about 5 months. I want to be honest about something, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering in a story like this. There's a particular kind of shame that comes with watching your savings disappear while your child is unwell. It's an irrational shame. Nobody in their right mind would blame you for spending everything you have to be near your kid. But it sits in your chest anyway. This feeling that you've failed at the one job you had, which was to keep your family safe and provided for. I carried that feeling around for a long, long time. Maisie did pull through, by the way. I want you to know that early, because I don't want you sitting there worrying about her for the next half hour while I talk about money. She came home. She's a grown woman now with her own life, and she's fine, genuinely fine. And every single dollar we spent to get her, there was worth it 1,000 times over. But her getting better didn't mean our problems were over. In a strange way, it just meant the crisis moved rooms, from the hospital ward into our kitchen, where the real damage was waiting for us. We came home to a building business that had effectively folded. Reg had done his best, bless him, but a 2-man outfit doesn't survive 1 man vanishing for the better part of a year. He'd taken on a job with a bigger construction firm in the city, which I never once blamed him for. He had his own mortgage, his own kids. But it meant I came home to a closed-up site office, a stack of unpaid supplier invoices, and a bank balance that made me feel sick every time I opened the app on my phone. The mortgage was the next domino. We'd missed payments during the worst of it, not through carelessness, just because there was genuinely no money. And by the time we tried to sort it out, we were behind in a way that felt impossible to claw back from. I won't pretend I handled that part gracefully. I remember sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of letters I hadn't opened, because opening them made the problem real, and Ellie finally sitting down across from me one night and saying, very quietly, "Paul, we have to look at these. Ignoring them isn't going to make them go away." She was right, obviously. But I want to be honest that for a period of a few months, avoidance felt like the only coping mechanism I had left. Eventually we made the call to sell the house. I still remember standing in the driveway the day we handed the keys over, looking at that Hills hoist, thinking about how many Sunday barbecues had happened under it, and feeling like was watching a chapter of my life get repossessed along with the bricks and mortar. We moved into a rental on the other side of town, smaller, damp in the corners in winter, a fair walk from the kids' school. Curtis, who'd been such a happy, mud-covered kid, went quiet for a while. Kids pick up more than we give them credit for. He knew things were bad, even if he didn't have the words for it. I tried picking up work where I could. A mate got me a few weeks on a building site doing labouring, which was humbling in its own way, going from supervising my own jobs to being the bloke fetching materials for tradesmen half my age. But I wasn't proud, not anymore. Pride is a luxury you can afford when your bank account has a buffer in it. Mine didn't. I did shift work at a hardware store on weekends. Ellie picked up more piano students than was probably good for her, teaching until 9 at night some days, and I remember feeling this deep, aching guilt watching her do that, because it felt like I should have been the one carrying more of the load. There was a night, and I think this is worth telling you honestly, where I sat out the back of the rental in the dark, on an upturned milk crate, because we didn't have outdoor furniture anymore, and I properly let myself feel how far we'd fallen. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just quietly. I thought about the term deposit. I thought about the site sign that used to say Bracken and Coombs, now sitting in a skip bin somewhere. I thought, I don't know how people come back from this. I'm not ashamed to say I cried out there for a good while, the kind of crying you do when you're trying not to wake anyone inside. If you're in that place right now, sitting on your own version of that milk crate, I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is real, and it's valid, and it doesn't mean it's permanent. It felt permanent to me too. It wasn't. The turning point, when it came, wasn't a lottery win or some stroke of financial genius. It was smaller than that, and slower, and it started with a bloke named Owen Faraday. Owen was an old client from the building days. We'd supervised a renovation on his place years back, and an extension after that, and we'd stayed loosely in touch, the way you do with people in a small town. He ran a modest building supply yard on the highway out of Wattlebrook, timber and hardware mostly, and he'd heard through the grapevine, because everything travels through the grapevine in a town like ours, that Bracken and Coombs had gone under, and that I was doing labouring work to get by. He turned up at the hardware store one Saturday, bought a tin of wood filler he almost certainly didn't need, and while I was ringing it up he said, "You still know how to run a site?" I told him I did. He said, "Come and see me Monday, not charity. I need someone who actually knows how a build should run, and you know construction better than anyone I've employed in 15 years. Then he paid for his wood filler and left before I could work out what to say. I want to pause on that moment, because I think it's the part of the story that matters most, and it's easy to rush past it. Owen didn't hand me a fortune. He didn't wipe out my debts or buy me a new house. What he did was give me one door, slightly ajar, and it was up to me whether I walked through it. I think that's how most turning points actually work, in real life, away from the movies. They're rarely a grand rescue. They're a door left ajar by someone who didn't have to leave it that way, and the decision, yours, to walk through it even though you're exhausted and embarrassed and not sure you've got anything left to give. I started at Owen's supply yard the following Monday, helping run the yard, supervising deliveries, advising customers and trades on materials, doing the kind of steady, unglamorous work I'd once thought I was above running my own outfit. And here's the honest part. It didn't fix everything overnight. Financial holes don't fill in like that. But it did something more important than fixing the number in the bank account. It gave me back a sense of who I was. I wasn't Paul the bloke whose business collapsed anymore, not entirely. I was Paul who knew how a job should be run, who customers started asking for by name, who Owen trusted to close up of an evening. The second part of the turning point was a conversation with Ellie, a few weeks into that new job, at our kitchen table, the same table where those unopened letters had once piled up. We sat down and, for the first time since it had all started, we actually looked at our situation properly instead of flinching away from it. We wrote it all down, every debt, every bill, every dollar coming in from the supply yard job and her piano students. It wasn't a pleasant exercise, but there's a strange relief in seeing the whole shape of a problem laid out on paper, instead of carrying it around as this shapeless dread in your chest. We made a plan, a boring, unglamorous, one step at a time sort of plan, and we agreed to check in on it together every fortnight, no matter how uncomfortable that conversation got. I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly what our plan was, because your situation isn't mine, and anyone selling you a one-size-fits-all formula from a YouTube video hasn't been in your kitchen. What I'll tell you instead is the two things that actually mattered. We stopped avoiding the problem, and we stopped trying to solve it alone. It took years, not months, to feel steady again, I want to be upfront about that, because I think stories like this do people a disservice when they compress the hard slog into a montage. There was no single day where a bell rang and everything was suddenly fine. There was a slow, unglamorous accumulation of small wins, a debt paid off, a second, smaller term deposit started again, this time in both our names, with an agreement that it genuinely would not be touched except for real emergencies. Owen eventually offered me a share in the supply yard as a junior partner, once he started thinking about slowing down himself, and a few years after that, Reg, my old mate from the building days, came back into the picture, and together we quietly rebuilt something small on the side, taking on small renovation and building jobs out of the yard on weekends. We never called it Bracken and Coombs again. We called it something new, because we were, by then, something new too. We're not in the big brick house with the hills hoist anymore, and honestly, I've made my peace with that. We've got a smaller place now, one we own outright. No mortgage hanging over it, which is a kind of freedom I don't think I appreciated the value of until I'd lived without it. Maisie's grown and healthy and doing her own thing, oblivious most days to how close things came to falling apart around her when she was 11. Curtis found his voice again somewhere along the way and, funnily enough, has taken an interest in the trade himself. I still think about that night on the milk crate sometimes, not with the same rawness, but with a kind of respect for the version of myself that was sitting out there in the dark, genuinely unsure whether he had it in him to keep going. I want to tell that version of me something, and I suppose, in a roundabout way, this whole video is me telling him. I told you at the start to picture your bank account hitting zero, and the phone ringing straight after. I told you that for 18 months I believed my life was over. I want to finish by telling you what I've learned in the year since, because I think it's the only part of this story that's actually useful to you, rather than just something to listen to. Financial collapse doesn't measure your worth. It measures what happened to you, not who you are. I used to think the term deposit disappearing meant I'd failed as a provider, as a husband, as a man. What I understand now is that it meant something extraordinarily difficult happened to my family, and we spent everything we had to get through it. And that is not failure. That is exactly what savings are for. If yours ever go the same way, protecting someone you love, I hope you can be gentler with yourself about it than I initially was with myself. And the other thing, the thing I most want you to take away from this, is that the way back is rarely one big moment. It's not a lottery ticket. It's not a miracle. And honestly, it's not really about money at all, not at its core. It's a door left ajar by someone who didn't have to leave it open. It's a kitchen table conversation you've been avoiding, finally had. It's turning up on the Monday, even though you're not sure you've got anything left in you. It's small, unglamorous, repeated decisions to keep going, stacked one on top of another, for longer than feels fair. If you're in the middle of your own collapse right now, if the numbers don't work, if someone you love is sick, if you're sitting on your own milk crate in the dark, wondering how anyone comes back from this, I can't promise you a timeline, and I won't pretend I know your exact circumstances, but I can tell you, from the other side of it, that the floor giving way is not the same as the story ending. Mine didn't end there. It just changed shape. And if you keep showing up to your own life, fortnight after fortnight, boring decision after boring decision, there's a very good chance yours will change shape too.